Fritz's German Band, the only traveling German band in Tennessee, performing all around the state and in other states too, especially in demand during the fall season for Oktoberfest celebrations. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Fritz, the leader of the band, who's an attorney in Nashville, Jerry Burkett. But when he's playing, and when he's dressed in his lederhosen, the music is his prime interest. He sings in 5 languages, and he started playing the accordion when he was 8 years old.
I started out in St. Louis, Missouri. Years ago, they used to have accordion schools, and they had accordion bands. And you'd go to this school one night for your lesson, then you'd go like on Friday night for band. And then periodically there would be some kind of a performance that the entire accordion school would go on. It'd be like an accordion band, and we had little uniforms, and we played out on the SS Admiral, which was a ship that was docked at St. Louis and other places for hospitals and so forth.
How did you happen to get interested in having this German band?
When I got to be, say, college age, I began playing more and more, and I was always interested in foreign languages, so I began learning a lot of ethnic songs that I could sing because nobody else was doing it. And I would accept engagements to play banquets, and I would perform these ethnic songs. Sometimes I'd sing, sometimes I wouldn't. And then, about 1969, I got a call to go and perform in Indiana at a German restaurant. Well, I could play some German songs, but I had no idea what all you could do with German music if you knew some German people. And they showed me how to have an Oktoberfest. So then I sort of let it ride a while, and then in 1972, I got a call to put a band together to play an Oktoberfest in Nashville, and one in Fort Campbell. And so that got me thinking that maybe the time for the Oktoberfest had come. But it wasn't until 1975 that I seriously put a band together and started accepting engagements on the road. And my wife and I and another couple formed a little German band called the Deutschlanders. And we accepted engagements in 11 different states, and went to Army bases, Air Force bases, Navy bases, country clubs. Anybody wanted to have an Oktoberfest. And so that's where the German band that presently exists started, really.
Are the same people still in it, your wife and the other couple now?
Well, my wife and the other couple no longer perform with me actively, but they do occasionally. The new band that we have now, the nucleus of it has been in existence since 1979. Gary Edwards is the drummer, and he was in the movie G.I. Blues with Elvis Presley. He was also in Germany for 3 years, and he was in Germany when that movie was filmed. Sam McFerrin is the tuba player. He's a computer expert. He can make that tuba do just about anything that you can do on any other instrument, including a piccolo. He's absolutely incredible. That's the basis. We have a man named David Balfe who joined the band last year on the trumpet, outstanding trumpet player. And then we still have one of our World's Fair people that we hired in Knoxville when we were at the World's Fair that plays with us when we play East Tennessee engagements. And his name is John Schneider, outstanding Knoxville musician that plays with the Knoxville Symphony.
I know you must be awfully busy during the Oktoberfest season, but I'm sure you play other times also.
We'll play an Oktoberfest any day of the year. We sure will. A lot of times we get called for Mayfests, Frühlingsfest, that's Springfests, Summerfests, and we've played a couple of what's called Spassfests up in Illinois in August. Sometimes for Christmas, and Thanksgiving even.
And you always play in costume for these events.
Sure.
Fritz and his German band, Jerry Burkett of Nashville. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
They are three, I would say, large marble caterpillars. Each one's about 4 feet long and a foot in diameter, and each weighs about 750 pounds.
These giant caterpillars are located at the Nickajack Welcome Center, a few miles north of Chattanooga on I-24. Tennessee Kaleidoscope was at the dedication ceremonies, along with state officials, musical groups from South Pittsburgh and Dunlap, and the artist. This is Lynn Folk with sculptor Bill Ralston of Nashville, who's often been asked, why caterpillars? Here he describes these huge marble creatures.
They are in three different poses, you might say. One is walking straight, one is humped up like an inchworm, and a third one has its front section reared up as though looking around. Also, they are in different colors of marble. These stones, by the way, are all Tennessee marbles, which I thought was a nice addition to the project, having all the stone come from Tennessee. One is a black marble, one is pink Tennessee marble, and the third is a darker marble they call cedar, sort of a dark red.
How did you happen to decide on the subject of caterpillars for this sculpture?
Everybody asked me that. Interestingly enough, these are not the first caterpillars I've done. I did one previously, and it was something in the form of an essay. I entitled it On Becoming a Butterfly, and I wanted it to suggest that although the caterpillar is an interesting creature in its own right, it was simply a stage towards becoming something even more beautiful. And I suppose I first thought of caterpillars themselves sitting out in the garden and just looking at the creatures and counting their legs and so forth, and it occurred to me that this would be a most unusual theme for a sculpture, so I went about it. And the Arts Commission saw this piece, which is in the Century 3 collection, as a matter of fact, and they liked it and said, can you do some for us on a larger scale? And I said, sure, let's do 3 in different colors of marble.
Oh, I see. So that's the way it came about.
As a merely practical matter, they are a good theme because they are compact and there are no slender projectiles that could be easily broken off. They cannot be easily defaced, and so they are, for that reason, more accessible to the public. They can be touched and petted and hugged, and I suspect children will sit on them, and that's fine with me because that was part of my guiding philosophy all through this project, that they be out where people could see them, touch them, etc.
Especially at an interstate tourist center and rest stop, I'm sure that a lot of climbing and all of that will go on, entertaining children. Tell me a little bit about yourself and about your career as a sculptor.
Okay, well, I've been sculpting professionally 10 years in Nashville area, and I've had shows all around the area and different parts of the state. I work primarily in stone, marble, and limestone, but I also work in clay and bronze. I teach sculpture down at Watkins Institute in Nashville, and currently I'm working on 2 or 3 shows, and perhaps I'll have a show in Paris later this fall, which I'm excited about.
You mean Paris, France?
Paris, France, yes.
Oh, that's nice. Do you do all sculpture or do you do painting and other forms of art too?
Although I enjoy two-dimensional work, I really don't have time to. Now, I do drawings, and I have a portfolio of drawings that help me with my work, but I don't do much painting, watercolor, and things like that. I just don't have the time.
Caterpillar sculptor Bill Ralston. In addition, Tennessee Arts Commission Executive Director Bennett Tarleton had an answer to why caterpillars.
One of the questions many of us expect to be asked today is, why caterpillars? I want to provide a partial answer by saying the Tennessee Arts Commission has a great commitment to Tennessee's young people. We know tomorrow's audiences for the arts and tomorrow's artists are in schools today. We also want to play a role in welcoming to Tennessee visitors, especially young people. And we believe this garden of caterpillars will appeal to young people especially. We hope they will play in the garden and with the caterpillars and remember happy times in Tennessee.
Dedication Day for the Caterpillar Sculpture Garden at Tennessee's Nickajack Welcome Center on I-24. This program made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and Johnson & Higgins of Tennessee, insurance brokers and employee benefit consultants. This is Lynn Folk.
That was a traditional Russian folk song called Korobushka, which means the merchant. It's also a dance.
David Chrapkiewicz, who makes balalaikas. This is Lynn Folk with Tennessee Kaleidoscope. Although David Chrapkiewicz specializes now in making fine violas, violins, and cellos, he makes balalaikas too and plays them. Here, he recalls his first acquaintance with the balalaika and his continuing fascination with it.
Before I started making the balalaika, I was a folk dancer, recreational folk dancing, and I lived in Rochester, New York when I did this. And I enjoyed listening to and dancing to Russian folk music, especially music which had the balalaika as background. And so that got me interested in, I wonder what the balalaika looks like, having never seen one, and what it plays like. And I happened to be in the museum there once, or actually the library, and I saw a book, How to Play the Balalaika. And in the book was a picture of a balalaika, so I got out my woodworking tools and made a balalaika, and it wasn't like I was planning on, here I was going to make this great musical instrument. I was just going to have fun, and whatever came out, came out. And so with screws and Elmer's glue and that kind of stuff, I threw together this instrument. I never saw balalaika when I made this instrument, so I really didn't have first-hand knowledge of how long the neck was supposed to be or anything like that. And it was unplayable. And when I saw a real balalaika, I figured out what was wrong with mine, so I took it apart. Actually, I took it apart 3 times before I could actually make it playable. Then I became interested in learning how to play it.
Did you have to take lessons then to learn to play it?
No. In the book, How to Play the Balalaika, I learned some basic techniques. I spent a little time in Germany after that, and I acquired a Russian balalaika, and I also acquired some other books on how to play the balalaika, and I became quite good at just playing simple folk songs, and eventually I was able to meet with some Soviet balalaika players who were extremely good. I mean, they were virtuosos, and they showed me exactly how to hold my hand and exactly how to do this, and I wasn't too far from it, but I still wasn't quite there. They were all very helpful, and eventually I became quite good at playing the balalaika, and we moved to a place near Montreal. It was actually in northern New York in the Adirondack Mountains. And there we commuted to Montreal, where I played the balalaika in a mandolin orchestra. And the director was a very old man who was an extremely fine balalaika player when he was younger, and he showed me some techniques. He was very helpful in giving me my final push toward where I am now in terms of playing the instrument.
Are there many balalaika players here in Nashville or in Tennessee?
I have one student who's learning right now, and there are a couple other people that have expressed interest in learning it. It is a difficult instrument because there are only 3 strings, and 2 of them are tuned to the same note, being an E. And most of the melody is played on the A string, which means, unlike the guitar or the mandolin or the fiddle, I play the fiddle, you have to shift around a lot to play a melody. In other words, move your whole arm up and down the neck of the instrument. Whereas on the fiddle, for example, I can play a lot of fiddle tunes in one arm position, just moving my fingers back and forth across the strings. On the balalaika, it's continually shifting around, and it's more difficult to do that, especially when you're playing fast. There's more chance of missing, not hitting the bullseye. But it's a fun instrument. I really enjoy it.
David Chrapkiewicz has lectured on balalaikas at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and presented balalaika workshops around the country. His many talents include dancing with the Royal Ballet of Canada and the New York City Ballet. He's a fiddler, plays with the Hit or Miss Amateur Band in Middle Tennessee, and professionally, he's making instruments in his Nashville workshop and studio. This program made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and HCA, the philanthropic arm of Hospital Corporation of America. This is Lynn Folk.
Well, I teach art at University High School in Johnson City, and I did a lot of crafts and things with students. And I am interested in fabric, and I think that's how I got into quilting.
Paul Rupert, an East Tennessee artist and art teacher who spends a lot of time doing quilting. He has a large number of quilts which he's designed and worked on, and he takes a special care of them, hoping they'll last for a long time so he can pass them on to members of his family. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope. As I talked with Paul Rupert, I asked him if it was unusual for a man to be a quilter.
Not so much anymore, but 4 or 5 years ago it was unusual for a man to be a quilter. At least nobody would admit it. There were people who did it, but they wouldn't admit to it.
I think they call them closet quilters or something like that.
I have a father-in-law that's 80 years old, and since he knew I quilted, he said that when he was younger, he did some of that, but he never mentioned it to anybody. When his mother would set up the quilt, he would work with her a little bit, but he would never admit to that because he was a sawyer by trade, and they're very muscular men and had heavy work, and he wouldn't admit to it.
Tell me about the quilts that you've done.
I started out by doing traditional quilts, pieced, and then appliqued. The first one I did, my mother's in a nursing home up in Pennsylvania, and I did a starflower quilt. And I didn't think that I would have the knack of doing the quilt stitches, so I sent it to one of the church groups and had it quilted. And the stitches in it were big enough that you could hook your toes in it. So I decided, well, I can at least do that well. So I started, and I've got it down to where I get very good stitches in that.
Does it take you a long time? Is it tiring?
Well, I don't pay any attention to the time. It's very relaxing. I get up early in the morning and get ready to go to work, and I sit down and quilt for a while. And then I go on with my chores, and if I have time, I come back and do a few more so that it's up most of the time until I get it finished.
How long does it take you, say, working like that a little bit every day to do a full-size quilt?
I'd say a month and a half. But I really have to concentrate on it to get it done.
What kind of materials do you use?
Well, for quilted quilts, I use basically cotton materials. And then for the tacked, it can be polyester, almost anything.
And you say you do your own designs?
I do now. I observed the traditional strawberry quilt where there's 4 in a line and 5 long, and that was very stereotyped to me, so I decided I wanted to do something different. So I designed a medallion kind of thing with 3 large strawberries in the center, and then a pattern of strawberry flower around the outside, and I used the tendrils of the plant to tie the whole thing together, and then around the large strawberries on the inside I did a basket weave, thinking back of the time when they had the little square boxes where the weave of the basket was in there, so I quilted the background in that basket weave.
Do you sell your quilts?
No.
What do you do with them then?
I have 4 children, and eventually I expect to give them to them. We probably have 85 quilts in our home.
Well, do you collect quilts also, ones that you don't make yourself?
My wife is a quilter also, and I think we just hate to part with them. Worry about whether they'll get a good home or whether they won't. I don't want them taken out in the backyard and sunbathed on or laid on with oil from sunbathing or using them for a tent or anything like that. So.
Well, you do get very attached to them when you put all that work on them, I'm sure.
You certainly do.
Paul Rupert, who's been a quilter for about 7 years now. He teaches art at University High School in Johnson City, and he's a member of the Watauga Valley Art League. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and Johnson & Higgins of Tennessee, insurance brokers, and employee benefit consultants. This is Lynn Folk.
From this great old man, there knows how to sing his old blues. The film, it's more or less sights and sounds and images, visual, music, narratives, that gives you a sense of place. Because Beale Street's sort of a 3-block area with nothing behind it. Many people say it's like a movie set. Well, it was a neighborhood. And what the multimedia show does and what the exhibits will do, what the film will do, was put you more in touch with what that neighborhood was all about.
Judy Peiser, director of the Center for Southern Folklore, which originated in Memphis in 1972. A few years later, Beale Street, where the blues began, was revived, and the center played a large part in bringing this about. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Judy, as she told me about art projects involving the history of Beale Street, about a new film, and about the multimedia show If Beale Street Could Talk, which brings back the spirit of the place, which is lively now, but which was almost forgotten a few years ago. I asked her if the Center for Southern Folklore was solely responsible for all that had been done on Beale Street.
No, we weren't really responsible. There was federal money put into the street, and there had to be some major interpretation of the street, so we were able to be that interpreter, be that public interpreter. And we had received a grant several years before that from the National Endowment for the Humanities, where we had developed a cultural study for the entire downtown region. And so eventually we'd like to do what we've done on Beale Street and other areas of downtown Memphis.
I noticed you were executive producer on the film on Beale Street. It must have taken a long time to get that together.
We researched in the Beale Street community, and when you say the Beale Street community, there's no community anymore, so you have to go back and find out who lived in the neighborhood, who had stores in the neighborhood, and then go back and talk to their families and find the people. And so it was a lot of research, just finding to whom to talk. We interviewed hundreds of people, and over about a 2-year period did the research and then developed the multimedia show, which is an 18-projector show within a film chain in it too, and it's all computerized. It takes you from the music of W.C. Handy to the music of B.B. King and Elvis Presley on the soundtrack, and in the narratives gives you the voice of W.C. Handy, who first wrote the blues in a cafe on Beale Street.
Where did you get the voice of W.C. Handy? He died quite a long time ago, didn't he?
He died in '58, but there's a record. In the record, he talks about his experiences, and then he performs some music.
Who's never trade blues, and the fine man on the corner who sings this Beale Street blues after the beat here. Yes, I know. I'd rather be right here.
And you get to meet the merchants and the children of the merchants that were on the street, and the musicians, and their sense of what it was like to play, and never get tired of playing music, or what Charlie Robinson sounded like. He never went up into a high C. He was, he stayed in about 2 octaves, and Hot Rod Hulbert describes that. You can just hear the music playing, and then you hear from people like Polly Walker and her friend Penny Southern, who talk about the excitement of going to Beale Street on a Saturday or a Sunday night, and what it was like to see the fan dancers at the Palace Theater, and then what businesses were like on the street, and then what it was like during Martin Luther King's last march on Beale Street. And then the show ends with a look at music, a look at rhythm and blues, and then how country music came to be called rockabilly, and then how rock and roll was formed with Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins.
The multimedia show, If Beale Street Could Talk, has been seen by thousands of visitors to Memphis and school children, and is available to scheduled groups at the Daisy Theater. Heard here, Judy Peiser, producer of the show. She's director of the Center for Southern Folklore. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, the WPLN Educational Foundation, and the Barkus-Nugent Group, computer consultants in Nashville. This is Lynn Folk.
Anything else I tried to do, I was always drawn back to writing. I worked in the oil fields for about 3 years when I got out of college, and eventually left that and came back because I had to write and made a lot less money writing.
Nashville author Bob Millard, whose strong motivation to write has resulted in his being a poet, a novelist, and a journalist. He's the Nashville correspondent for the entertainment business newspaper Variety. He writes for other music industry publications too, and his most recently published work is a biography of singer Amy Grant. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Bob Millard when we talked about his first literary interest, poetry.
In writing, I think, in getting published, poetry was the first thing. It was my last year in college I began to write seriously and seek publication and began to get published.
What were some of the things you had published?
Primarily short poems. I guess I would be some sort of a crossbreed between a son of an agrarian and a beat, because both of those influences were strong. A beat by my generation and agrarian by being in the South.
You must have read a lot of poetry then before you actually got started writing it.
I did and enjoyed it, but when you're in high school, you usually don't tell people you enjoy reading poetry.
Why is that?
People are just not old enough to accept poetry. It has a sort of a sissy connotation to insecure high school kids. A lot of them. Probably they're more secure now than they were when I was a teenager.
Well, I think the people who write poetry and read poetry are most loyal to their art.
I've heard it said that only poets read poetry.
What would you have to do to get other people beside poets to read it?
To read it, I'm not sure. You would have to appear in publications that weren't strictly literary. In New York, you find there are publications that do feature poetry. And again, to my generation, Rolling Stone carries poetry. There are 2 or 3 poems in every issue of that.
One of Bob Millard's poems is included in the new literary anthology Homewards, a book of Tennessee writers. He appeared in the Nashville Poets Anthology of 1978, and he gives frequent readings of his poems. As we continued our discussion, we talked about some of the pitfalls and obstacles which writers encounter, and he's well acquainted with a lot of them. But even so, he's compelled to pursue a career as a writer.
Absolutely have to write. It's like food. If I don't write, I feel somehow deprived.
Well, you must spend then most of your waking hours writing. You have regular hours? How do you do it?
Some of the most irregular hours you can imagine. A typical day for me is to roll out of bed at the crack of 8 and drink coffee and read at least 2 newspapers. Yesterday's Wall Street Journal and today's Tennessean and Variety. And then sometimes I'll get on the phone for an hour just trying to put off writing. I build up this big dam, this big charge of I've got to write feeling by putting it off, and when I finally get to it, it just flows.
Isn't that funny? You really want to do it, and you just think about it all the time, but you can't get started. Writer's block or something they call it. But by doing that, you do build up a charge.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's helpful then.
It is. I always had to steal time to write. And I guess in a way I still have to create all these barriers to writing, so I feel like I'm cheating somebody when I go sit down and write.
But then once you get down to it, you just go right at it.
I write as fast as I can type, which can be up to 50, 60 words a minute. And I've bought a word processor so that rewriting is easier to do now, so I do rewrite more.
When you write fast like that, do you just write down anything to get it out of your head and then go back and rearrange it?
In a way, but that's part of that process of calling people and putting off writing is I'm just below the surface. I'm mulling over what I'm going to be doing.
Writer Bob Millard, who's working on a novel now after completing his latest book, the Amy Grant biography. This program made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the HCA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Hospital Corporation of America. This is Lynn Folk. This is Lynn Folk with Tennessee Kaleidoscope at historic Rugby, the English village on the Cumberland Plateau in East Tennessee. Rugby was established in 1880 by Thomas Hughes, an English author and reformer who came here, founded a colony, and hoped that it would attract the younger sons of English gentry. And it did attract them for a while, but life at Rugby was difficult, and the dreams of Thomas Hughes were shattered, along with some of the buildings he built. But some of those structures from that time are still standing and have been restored. And now increasing numbers of visitors come to Rugby, especially for the festival celebrations and pilgrimages, when tours are scheduled, and when there's entertainment by groups like the Shepherd's Recorder Ensemble of Harriman and the Sourwood Morris Dancers from Knoxville. Here's one of the dancers, Ruth Horton.
Morris dancing is from England. It came to us by way of New England. There's been a revival of Morris dancing going on in England that kind of caught on in New England, and it's spread all over the United States. There are Morris dancers in every state, I think, now.
Did I hear you say during your program that only men do this?
The form of Morris dancing we do was traditionally done by men over the last about century and a half in England. There are women Morris dancers in England, and there's plenty of legends of women dancing when the men weren't able to. For instance, when they were off to war, the women would keep up the tradition. So we're sure that women danced Morris, but not in recent times.
Can you describe Morris dancing to me?
Well, it's an English country dance, sort of dance, that's done in a set of 6 dancers. We wear bells and we wave handkerchiefs or clash sticks, and it's a very vigorous dance with lots of hopping and jumping, and all the dances are very symmetrical.
Do you get together and practice often?
We practice weekly on Wednesday nights on the University of Tennessee campus, Ayers Hall. And we're open, and anybody who wants to come dance is welcome to. We have also danced just ourselves around town, and we also go out of town and go to Morris festivals, which are called ales, named after the quantity of that liquid that people drink.
I've heard people from Oxford, England, talk about a special day in Oxford when the Morris dancers dance. I think it's May the 15th or June. I guess that's it.
May the 29th is a Morris festival. The Morris dancers usually get up at dawn on May Day and dance, and we danced at dawn this year. Bring in the May.
The musicians who play in the Shepherd's Pipes Recorder Ensemble are all amateurs, according to David Gable of Harriman.
We're based in Harriman. We have people from Oak Ridge, and we have some from Knoxville occasionally, but we're mostly Harriman people. We just play for the fun of it. None of us are professional musicians. We all are musicians of some sort, but not really professional musicians, and we play various places just around the area, concerts in churches. We've played for a Christmas banquet up at UT in Knoxville. We have a festival once a year in Harriman. Anytime anybody invites us to play, we'll play.
And tell me about the instruments that you play.
Well, we've got mostly recorders. We've got a family of recorders. We've got the soprano, the alto, the tenor, the bass, the sopranino, and a few others. We play a psaltery sometime. We have cornemuse, sometime crumhorn. We're diversifying the kinds of instruments to get a more medieval sound as we can.
What kind of selections mainly do you play and sing?
Usually things from late medieval, Renaissance period, English, French, German, Italian, whatever it is. We sing a lot of things, sing them in the original languages. We had a Spanish song on the program today. We've done Italian songs, German, French.
In addition to performances like this in Rugby, the Shepherd's Recorder Ensemble and the Sourwood Morris Dancers often appear at other festivals throughout the state. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.